All right, so we're wrapping up a 3-week series on reconciliation, and today, let me back up and let's talk about what we did over the last couple of weekends. 2 weekends ago, we talked about what it means for us to be reconciled before God, and we talked about our trust with God, we talked about our faith in God, we talked about where we're at in our relationship with God, and that some of us just need to stop for a moment and make sure that we're on the same page with God. And so we stopped the service a couple Sunday mornings ago, and we said, okay, just take a moment and talk to God about your trust, about your hope, about your promise, about your faith, and where you and God are at in your relationship together. Maybe something had happened in your life. Maybe there was something there that in your life that you and God needed to talk about before we could move on. Because the truth is that sometimes I think we move on far too quickly, thinking everything's just going to be okay, and we don't deal with those elements, those items that are getting in the way of our future, getting in the way of what God wants to do. And so there was a moment where we just said, okay, we're going to stop and take a moment and just clear the air with God. And so a couple of weekends ago, we did that. And maybe that's just a good thing for you to do once in a while, for all of us to do once in a while, right? And then last weekend, we talked about what reconciliation looks like in a world where things are changing dramatically and radically. And so Pastor Lan and I were up here last Sunday morning, and we talked about what it looks like to be racially connected and to be in a world where racial reconciliation, we believe, is possible. I think it was a powerful weekend, and interestingly enough, we got some of our highest numbers in responses from last weekend. I heard it through text, through emails, through Facebook messengers, through phone calls, through you name it. We have heard so many comments about last weekend. And so if you didn't get a chance to see last weekend, it is on our Facebook page link. It's a YouTube video, so you can type in CrossPoint Church of PA. Make sure you put the of PA, because there are lots of other CrossPoint churches out there. And make sure that you tune in to last Sunday's message. I think it's about 25 minutes long, which is one of my shorter ones, as people keep reminding me. So, but make sure you check that out. The weekend before that is also on our YouTube channel, so make sure you check those out. If you didn't get a chance to see either of those, feel free to forward them on to somebody else or tune somebody else in to that YouTube channel so that other people can check that out and see what's going on at your church. And so those are the things we've talked about. We said last week that we needed to do all of that work so that we could move into the next space, and that is that we need to start working on our relationship into the world that we live in, because the world we live in needs reconciled before God, right? Amen? We need to be a part of the influencing factor in the world that we live in. I don't believe God has called us to be ostriches. Isn't that a great thing? I mean, I love the awkwardness and the funky look of an ostrich, but we all know what I mean by that, right? Most of us, at least in the room, understand what I mean by that, and that is that there are those moments when an ostrich will become extremely scared, and instead of running, they will simply just bury their head and hide, thinking that big albatross of a body, that big ostrich of a body, can hide simply by hiding its head. It's kind of like what we did when we were kids, right? You can't see me now, can you? You can't see me now, can you? There I am. And so it's all happening inside your mind, right? And so we need to make sure that as Christians living in the world today, that we're not living in such a way that we think that the world isn't seeing us. I'm going to say that again. We need to stop living in the world in such a way that we think that the world does not see us, because the world sees us. As soon as we make some kind of proclamation in our lives, no matter how subtle it might be, that we follow Jesus in some way, whether you might say, well, on Sunday morning I can't do that because I go to church. And that registers with people. Or you may choose to just bow your head quickly and say a prayer when you're out to eat, and you're hoping nobody notices. But they see it. They see you taking that moment to reflect and to thank God. Or maybe you've said something or done something in such a way that you have let other people know. Maybe it's a cross around your neck. Although that can be very casual for us, it means something, doesn't it? And people pick up on that. And so people are watching. They're watching to see what happens. And so it's important for us to start talking about what it looks like for us to be in the world in such a way that the world is changing for the better. Because so many times, at least if you watch the news, so many times it feels like the world is changing for the worse and not the better. And honestly, there are moments when I think that's our fault. If I just can be honest with you for a moment, I think in some way it's the church's fault. We thought everything was going to be fine. I remember growing up in an age when we thought the world was basically Christian, right? I never really questioned that growing up as a kid, that we lived in a Christian world, and on our money it said, in God we trust. I would have never thought that I would live in a lifetime where the Ten Commandments would be removed from the public forum. I always thought that was a pretty good baseline to structure everything else out of. Never thought that as growing up, that I would live in a world where you could not pray openly in a school setting. I never thought that I would grow up in a world where there would be a movement to take "In God We Trust" off of our money. Or do you remember when they tried to take that part of God out of the Pledge of Allegiance? I wasn't thinking that any of those things were possible in the world that we used to live in. And there are moments when I wonder if that isn't our fault, that as believers, we have not said enough, or been enough, or done enough in the world that we live in. We have lived our Christian life far too casually sometimes. So the passage we're reading today from Ephesians chapter 4 talks about the same kind of thing. Paul is addressing the church in Ephesus, right? Ephesus, a town in what is now Asia Minor, an area in Turkey. And Ephesus is this wonderful town, this kind of hotbed, because not only is there this Christian community that's growing in Ephesus, right? But there are also pagan religions that have been using Ephesus as kind of their home base. And so there are temples to false gods that are incredibly popular in the town of Ephesus. And so Paul, as he was on his missionary journeys, this apostle named Paul, right? Transferred from Judaism over into Christianity, changed his name from Saul to Paul, and he is now traveling around. And everywhere he travels, he establishes a group of believers, and then he creates the church, in effect, a uniting of those believers into daily devotions and weekly study and weekly worship and communion and those kinds of things that group of believers is going to do together. And then he moves on to the next town to do it all over again. And on occasion, he will write back to those places, to those towns, and say, here's how things need to be going. And he has heard about some things that are happening in Ephesus. And he wants to say to them, look, here's the deal. You're not the same as you used to be. Thank you, Jesus. Can you just thank you, Jesus, for not being the person we used to be? There are days when I can't believe how far God has taken me. But Paul is saying, look, you're not the persons you used to be. And so here's what you need to hear. Don't keep living the way you used to live, because you're not that person anymore. And he equates that to the terminology of those who are inside the faith and those who are outside the faith, and he talks about Gentiles. Now that terminology basically means anybody who is outside the faith. Some translations actually go as far as use the word pagan. That those who are opposite, or those who are different, or those who are distant from God are the Gentiles. Now in that world, in Paul's mind, remember Paul grew up Jewish, and so if you're not Jewish, you're a Gentile, right? And so to him, it's either one or the other. You're either in the faith or out of the faith, and in his mindset, the way his brain works, you're either Jewish or you're Gentile. Those are the only two options. The reality is you're either in the faith or you're outside the faith, and that's why he's using this terminology of Gentile. And he says, don't live any longer like the Gentiles do. Don't live any longer like those who are outside the faith, who don't know anything about God. Don't live like that anymore. You can't live like that anymore. And he goes through a list, kind of a laundry list of all those things. Now you have to wonder, you have to kind of ask yourself, were they really that bad? These people? Were these people really that bad? And I kind of wonder, I've done some historical study, and as far as I know, people back then were somewhat like people like us. They kind of got up in the morning, they went to work, they got home at the end of the day, they made supper, they went to bed, they got up, did it all over again. But there is an underlying piece that Paul is speaking to, and that is a culture of, let me use the word debauchery. Do you know what that means? A culture of just living badly. That is the undertone of the Roman society of the day in which Ephesus is a part of. There is this undertone of doing things and being okay doing things that we would associate with being incredibly, incredibly wrong. And so, Paul is saying, you can't live like that anymore. You can't be in both of these worlds. As much as we try, don't we? As much as we'd love to say, well, I don't want to leave this behind. And there are people who say, I don't want to become a Christian because I don't want to stop doing some of the things I love to do. Have you ever heard that? I don't want to stop doing some of those things. And here's where they get that idea from. Because the reality is some of those things are harmful. Some of those things are spiritually devastating to the soul of the human person that we are striving and that God has created us to be. And so God is saying to us, through this guy by the name of Paul, he's saying to us here in Ephesus, look, you can't be like that anymore. Please stop doing some of those things, because here's what's happening. You're telling the rest of the world you don't have to be different. And the truth is, if you become a follower of Jesus, you are different. Not necessarily different in a negative way. You're different. You're not different from other people. You're still a person just like everybody else. No, what's going on is you're different inside. You are changed. And because of that, you've got to start living a life that looks like you've been changed. Now, Paul says that there are those people who are outside the church who don't get this and never will. He uses terminology. I find it interesting. He says that their hearts are hardened, their minds are closed. He uses a unique word that when he uses the word hardened that I think is really important. It's a word that actually means petrified. Now we know petrified, right? The petrified forest. We know dinosaur fossils, things that have been so hardened that there is no way, so rigid that there's no way that they cannot, that they can be softened. It's no matter how long you soak them, no matter what you do, these things are petrified. And that's the word he's using. And he said he's using it because he understands that in order for your heart to be softened, you've got to be willing to allow the hardness to go away. We know what a hard heart looks like. We know what a hard heart sounds like. And Paul is saying, look, you cannot be like that anymore. There are those whose hearts are so hardened that they will never get this, and you can't live like that. You've got to be someone with a softened heart. You've got to be someone who allows Jesus to come in and change your life. And see, I believe that the only thing that can change is a hardened heart, a petrified heart. I think the only thing that can change that is a miraculous event done by God himself. I think that's the only way you can have a hard heart changed. God has to be the one who does it. I think God's the only one who can take something from a petrified state into a place of new life, a softening that needs to take place. And we as believers are supposed to have softened hearts, not petrified hearts. And so God calls us into this place of being people who our lives have been changed, that God has come in and done something miraculous in our lives. Let me just ask you, has God ever done anything miraculous in your life? Has God ever done anything miraculous in your life? It kind of made you different, didn't it? Changes your outlook, it changes your perspective, it changes how you see people, it changes how you see events, it changes everything about you. Let me just ask you, has Jesus ever changed your life? Do you see things differently? I know people who have said to me, I see colors differently. I see life more vibrantly because of what I've been through. It wasn't easy. I wouldn't want to go back and do it again, but I can tell you I will never be the same. My life has been undone. I would say their hearts have been softened and their lives have been changed. How has Jesus changed your life? It's a great question, isn't it? Yeah, and I think every one of us needs to have an answer to that question, because at some point in life, you may be confronted with someone who needs to know the answer to that question, because they're struggling, they're searching, they're wondering what this Jesus thing is all about. And it might be good for you to be able to say, this is how Jesus changed my life. And maybe you're thinking about that right now, and I hope that you're coming up with one or two or three different things that have happened in your life to say, Jesus changed my life in this way. This is who I am today because of what Jesus has done in my life. I can tell you honestly, I'm standing on this platform because Jesus changed my life. This was not the life I had planned. This was not the way I was going to live. This was not what I had in store. I began to realize that when I met this really pretty girl. And I was not ready to meet a really pretty girl like this one. Because not only was she pretty on the outside, she was beautiful on the inside. And I thought, this is the kind of girl you marry. No. No. It had me so upset that I would get nauseous in her presence. You know, just a little of that. Like, what's that about? And I realized that there was something greater at work than me just running into the perfect girl. I ended up marrying her. It's made all the difference in the world. Because you see, what God was doing was God was changing my life at that moment because he had greater things in store for me later on. If I'd have gone down my path, well, my testimony would be different. But that didn't mean I did everything the way I was supposed to. I believe God at that moment wanted me to be in ministry from day one. I believe God did that, and God brought me together with the right woman because he knew that she would make a great pastor's wife, and she would be a great support and a helpmate to me. But I thought, there's no way. So I went to the Marine Corps. Semper Fi. So it's required. It's kind of like we are in Penn State. If somebody says Semper Fi, you have to say it right back. Actually, you're supposed to add on do or die at the end, but that's a whole other story. So I thought, well, okay, God, this is you're pushing me way too hard, way too fast. You're trying to change way too much in my life right now. I've got a plan, Lord. Any of you ever had a plan that God messed up? I got a plan, Lord. And so I'm going to see how I can live out my plan without you interfering. How far away can I get from God? Let me see just how far away I can get from God. And so I figured the Marine Corps is pretty far away from God, at least according to all the stories I'd heard about Marines, right? I figured that was as far away from God as I could get. My second week in boot camp, we had just come back from chapel. Some of you have heard me tell this story, so I ask you to endure with me for just a second. But my second week, we had just come back from chapel. It's Sunday morning, and the drill instructor said, all right, I can't do this anymore. It's chapel stuff. He didn't use the word stuff. And so he said, I need two lay leaders. I need a Catholic lay leader and I need a Protestant lay leader, and you guys are going to walk all the guys down to chapel and back. I'm not doing this chapel stuff. So I need a Catholic lay leader. Somebody just step forward. One of you Roman Catholics, just step forward. And this guy down the line, I mean, we're all standing in the squad bay. There's 72 of us there. We've got our bunks all nice and pressed. You could bounce a quarter off of them, right? All that kind of stuff. And this guy steps forward, and he says, there's your Catholic lay leader, guys. So you Catholics, that's the guy who's going to walk you down to chapel, to your mass thingy, whatever you call it, he said. And so the guy steps back in line, right? And he said, now I need a Protestant lay leader. And I remember the words my father said. Those of you who have been in the military, you've heard these words. Don't volunteer for anything, right? So I'm standing there, and we're at attention. And it's, we had already started the day with push-ups and mountain climbers and squat thrusts, you name it, and we had already done that at 5 a.m. before breakfast. And he says, fine. Everybody just drop and start doing push-ups till I get a Protestant lay leader. And I swear to you, I did not feel the push from behind, but I did one of these. I don't know what it was. I don't know why, except that I had done enough push-ups that day. And he said, fine, there's your Protestant lay leader. And I stepped back in line. I don't know, maybe everybody else took a step back. It could have happened. And I was left out there. What I didn't realize, there I am, second week in boot camp. This was my place to run away from God. If you ever had a Jonah moment in your life, this was mine, right? This was my Tarshish. And I was supposed to be going to Nineveh. But no, I'm going this other direction. I'm going this opposite way. And so my third week in boot camp, now boot camp's 11 weeks long, right? My third week in boot camp, this guy gets a Dear John letter. You know what those are, right? They're not from John. Just want to make you aware. And I don't know the name of the gal, but I remember him. His name was Singleton. And he went to the drill instructor. He's opening this mail, and he's got tears running down his face, and the drill instructor had a hard heart. They have to. And he said, go see the lay leader. And I went, oh, crud. Because all of a sudden now I'm sitting on my bunk with this guy named Singleton, and he's bawling his eyes out because this girl has found another guy and just can't do this separation anymore, and she's moved on. And I'm saying it's going to be okay. And I don't know if it's going to be all right or not. But he needed to hear words from a softened heart. Are you with me? Wow. Wow. God is desiring that in the world. How has God changed your life? Because God can take people who he has changed their lives, and he can put them in unique situations in order to start reconciling the world. You see, those moments that you have when your heart is softened for somebody else, you are bringing reconciliation into the world. You're bringing something new and something refreshing and something restorative into the world that you live in when you bring your softened heart into those places. I know that for a lot of us in this room, we're good old-fashioned Pennsylvania Dutchy people. We don't do a softened heart very well, right? We do bootstraps up, nose to the grindstone really well, but this softened heart stuff, we need to get a hold of this. We need to get our minds around what it's like to walk into situations and allow the situation to affect us. So much so that we want to bring Jesus to that circumstance. We want to bring Jesus to that situation. And so this passage goes on to say, here are the things that we need to be doing. We need to be doing some things. So let's hit this list of some things that we should be doing in order to bring a softened heart and a reconciled life into the world that we live in so the world can see the hope and possibility of reconciliation. You ready for that? First note is this. We need to live our faith daily. We need to start living this out every single day. We cannot check out. We cannot dismiss. We cannot think that Sunday is enough. Because here's what you and I know, Sunday ain't enough. Sunday morning for 1 hour just isn't enough. This is not. It can't be, it shouldn't be, it wasn't built to be. Sunday morning, this 1 hour is our way to say, God, thank you. Thank you for all you've done. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for the things that are going on in my life. Here's what I need, Lord. Here's where we're at. Here's the healing. It's an opportunity for the community to gather together and give praise to God. Instead, what we need to be doing is we need to be living out our faith daily, not just for 1 hour on a Sunday morning. That's never going to be enough to see you through life and to see a world reconciled back to God. Because Monday morning, when your faith hits the road Monday morning, people are watching. And that's where the reconciliation of the world can take place. Are you with me? It makes sense, doesn't it? We can't just do this on Sunday mornings. We've got to bring it into the world that we live in. I don't know what that looks like in your world, because each one of us in this world are living in different places and different jobs and different industry opportunities and different places where we're at. But in some way, you can bring that heart into the place where you live, into the place where you work, into the people that you interact with, by simply allowing yourself to stop for a moment and say, I'm living Jesus today, no matter what. I'm going to bring Jesus today, no matter what. I'm going to live every day like Jesus is walking right beside me, holding my hand, hands on my shoulders, whispering in my ear, inviting me to live him out today. It's the first thing we need to do, living our faith every single day. Second thing we need to do is we need to tell the truth. This passage is clear. It says in verse 25, and thank you, Sue, for reading. Verse 25, it says, stop telling lies. I'd love to expand on this, but I don't think I need to. I preach long enough, often enough, that I can just say, that makes sense, doesn't it? Right? Stop telling lies. Instead, tell the truth. Tell the truth. I love it when people say, well, you know, this truth, the telling the truth thing, does that mean that when my wife says, does this dress make me look fat, I got to tell her the truth? Yes. The honest truth is going to, and right now I forget who made the quote, but somebody said the quote is, if you always tell the truth, you don't have to remember what you said. All right, enough said? Let's move on. All right, next note. Don't be controlled by your anger. Hello. Don't be controlled by your anger. It says, this is a great passage, and some of you know this. Some of you have actually quoted it. Some of you have said this is the best marriage advice you could give somebody, right? Don't sin by letting anger control you, is what verse 26 says. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. That's what my mother used to say to me as she would give me advice on how to live my life as a married man. Your dad and I never went to bed angry. I was like, really? Because there were a lot of nights I heard you guys talking way into the night. Yeah, but we didn't fall asleep angry. I was like, oh, okay, now I understand. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. It's not worth it. Is it? It's not worth it. To be a person who is just controlled by anger doesn't work. It doesn't get you anywhere, and people shut down almost immediately when you bring out the anger, right? In the office, they tell me I have a voice, the voice. When things aren't going my way, I can be a little stern. I often think it's me just holding fast to the vision and saying, no, that we're not going to do that, we're going to do this. And they say, Dave, you've got the voice. I'm like, okay, you're right, I need to back down. I am fortunate that I have good people around me who are willing to say that to me. Not all of us are that fortunate. A lot of us, let me just say this, if you don't think you have an anger problem, that's okay, but ask other people around you if you have an anger problem, because I guarantee you they know whether you do or not. Because they've been on the receiving end of your anger. And they'll tell you whether you have an anger problem or not, right? Don't be controlled by anger, because anger is an incredible bridle that will pull you in directions you don't want to go. We've all been there. We all know how that feels. It's a bit in the mouth that will pull you in a direction you do not want to go. Next, we need to live generously. We need to start giving our lives away generously. And I'm not talking about your finances. I'm talking about your life. Do you live in such a way that you're generous? Generous with your love, generous with your care and compassion, generous with your mercy, generous with your trust and faithfulness in other people. Are you generous with all that God has given you? Are you generous with your home, your finances, your resources, your time? Are you generous? We are supposed to start living generously. In verse 28 it says, stop being a thief if you're stealing. Instead, you use your hands for good work and then give generously to others in need. Lastly, we should be people who watch what we say. Be observant about the things in life. We need to instead, it says here, make sure you're encouraging others, that we're being an encouragement in the world we live in. You want to reconcile the world, encourage somebody. You want to build somebody up and start bringing somebody into a faith that you have, start encouraging them. I got a chance to meet a guy last night. This guy has been encouraged for a long time to come to our church. And finally, the guy who's been doing the encouraging, came over to me and said, I want you to meet the guy I told you about that I've been working on. Don't you love that? Because I'm feeling like, well, as the pastor, I have no idea what kind of reaction I'm going to get when I walk into this situation, because I'm going to be introduced. And so my friend introduces me to who he's been working on to come to church. Oh, he says, you're Pastor Dave. I'm like, oh, here we go. This is going to be good. And he said, I've heard a lot about you. And I've been told I need to come to your church. Everybody must think I'm a heathen. I said, well, we can fix that. He said, yeah, you probably could. I said, when you walk in, you're probably going to know a bunch of people. And I said, but the truth is there's only one you really need to get to know. So let me just tell you, when you walk in, I won't call you out and make you stand up. But I'm going to be glad you're there. How are you encouraging somebody into the faith? How are you being an encouragement in the world that you live in so that people can see Jesus in your life? Because people are waiting for it. They're listening for it. They're longing for something that makes a difference, not just in this world, but for an eternity. And we, the church, those of us who make up the body of believers, it's our job to bring that to the world we live in. You've heard me say this before. It's easy to do it in here, isn't it? So let me encourage you. You can do this. It's possible. If you take these things and start living them out, living it out daily, telling the truth, don't lie, doing the things that this passage is saying we need to do, not being like those who are not changed, but being a person who recognizes the change and bringing that hope for change into the world around us. This Memorial Day, it doesn't get past me that we made a decision to talk about how to expend your life making a difference for somebody else's life. To give everything you've got so that somebody else's life could be changed. Doesn't get past me that is how this series ended up. And so, I think the greatest heroes are people who go out every single day and give their life away so that others might know eternity. Let me pray that you become one of those kinds of heroes. Heavenly Father, this is a challenging task that you've laid out before us, to be the change in the world we're hoping to see, to be the ones who initiate it. Lord, there are days when we're just tired or exhausted or we just don't feel like we have it left, Lord. And those are the moments when we find ourselves weak and we find our witness failing. And so, Lord, help us. Help us in every moment to be the people you want us to be the witnesses you want us to be, to have a testimony that is powerful, that we can bring to bear at any given moment, at any given time. For Lord, you place us in particular situations because you know that in that moment, someone needs to see you. And you've asked us to be the ones who bring you, to bring the holiness, the righteousness, the relationship with you that we have to bear on the life or the circumstance that you've placed us in. Help us to do that well, Lord, every single day. For God, you have said that we are your plan for reconciling the world, to bring Jesus to the world. You've asked us to be the vehicles. And so help us to do that, Lord, today, tomorrow, and every day from here on out until the day you call us home. And we'll give you all the praise and glory in Jesus' name. And all of God's people said...